Somewhere in the vastness of space, aboard a massive space station, a Kree soldier slumped lifelessly in his harness, blood trailing from his mouth. On the other side of an observation glass, two Shi'ar scientists observed the scene with disappointment. One of them lamented the Kree's lack of resilience, noting that the host had failed post-implantation. On the floor lay a discarded facehugger, evidence of the failed experiment. Despite the setback, the scientists reassured themselves that for every failure, their experiments advanced 2 steps closer to success. 4 out of 5 attempts in their current batch had proven successful, and the most intriguing result came from a Skrull specimen. One scientist marveled at the adaptability of the Skrull, while the other acknowledged the grim reality. Without a homeworld to seed, the Skrull's usefulness remained limited. The conversation was cut short as alarms blared across the station. Computers reported the approach of 4 assault crafts, their designs unmistakably Wakandan. The scientists exchanged a glance of concern as they realized their facility was under attack. The Wakandan crafts breached the station swiftly. The airlock hatch exploded inward, and the Hatut Zarazi, Wakanda's elite forces, stormed aboard, clearing the way. T'Challa, the Black Panther, entered through the smoke, followed closely by his son. Azari, the head of the Hatut Zarazi, urged caution, but Azari dismissed the warning, emphasizing the stakes. The weapon traced to this facility had forced the quarantine of an entire Wakandan colony world, with his people dying. Azari declared that no risk was too great to end this threat. Scout alerted the team to approaching enemies. From the shadows of the station, Xenomorphs emerged, their hisses echoing through the corridors as they charged. T'Challa called on Azari, who stepped forward confidently. Lightning arced from Azari's body, striking the advancing creatures. 3 leapt into the air, but the electricity tore through them, reducing them to smoking ruins that fell lifelessly to the ground. T'Challa placed a hand on his son's shoulder, commending his efforts. Turning to his soldiers, he commanded them to find the masterminds behind the experiments and bring them to him alive. It did not take long before the soldiers captured one of the Shi'ar scientists. The prisoner was dragged before T'Challa, bleeding a white, viscous fluid from his wounds. The Hatut Zarazi reported that the scientist had attempted to purge the station's data, but they had managed to salvage some information. The reports revealed horrifying details. The same weapon used to devastate the Intergalactic Empire had already been launched toward a dozen worlds. As T'Challa listened, his warrior hesitated before revealing that one of the targeted worlds was Earth. The revelation struck T'Challa silent. Slowly, he removed his helmet, staring at the captured scientist in shock. T'Challa's voice dropped to a whisper as he asked the scientist what kind of monster could conceive such horrors. The scientist met his gaze and replied cryptically, declaring he was more than a mere monster and that his plans extended far beyond what T'Challa could comprehend. The Black Panther watched as the scientist reached up and pulled off what appeared to be a wig, revealing the smooth metallic surface of an android. Stamped behind its ear was the emblem of Weyland-Yutani, a human corporation. The realization dawned on T'Challa. This was not a Shi'ar being, but a machine. The android looked up at him, its artificial nature clear even as it echoed the philosophical question, "If you prick me, do I not bleed?" T'Challa's helmet slid back into place as his son handed him a sword. Without hesitation, T'Challa swung the weapon, severing the android's head from its body in a single strike. Meanwhile, the worlds targeted by the androids had already fallen under attack. Seed probes had launched, each deploying 4 queen eggs and 12 infected hosts in suspended animation. The pods struck the planets, and the creatures spread like locusts. Within hours of bursting free from their host, the drones reached full maturity, constructing hives within a single day. Days later, the queens were born and began producing eggs at an unstoppable rate. Within a week, each queen had established a sprawling hive, and within a month, an endless army of xenomorphs ravaged the planets, swarming cities and leaving destruction in their wake. It was the perfect weapon for extinction, wiping out every living thing on Earth, whether they were baseline humans or something greater. The city of Attilan could have stood against it, but fractures within the unity of the Inhumans causes the cracks in their great walls. Through these breaches, the alien invaders poured in, leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. No records remain of Atlantis' fall, but the creatures claimed the underwater city all the same, without a king to defend them and no chance to call for aid. Wakanda endured longer than most. but even they could not hold out forever. The mutants of Krakoa, understanding the futility of the fight, they activated their portals and fled to Mars, leaving Earth behind. As the last portal closed, sealing their escape, one figure refused to follow. Apocalypse remained, standing amid the inferno of Krakoa. He had lived for millennia by one creed: only the fittest survive, and he was prepared to face the alien invaders. And so the Earth fell, leaving only one human city standing, a fortified stronghold rising from the ruins of America. It was built by the enigmatic old man Weyland, who seemed to have foreseen the impending doom. Elsewhere in Weyland Tower, an aged Bruce Banner stood by a window, watching the sun dip behind the distant mountains. Behind him, Carol Danvers entered quietly, her presence breaking the stillness as she remarked on his habit of staring into the sun. Bruce, with a faint smile, shrugged it off, acknowledging that his gamma-powered cataracts had already robbed him of much of his sight, but admitting it wouldn't stop him from looking. She asked how late their visitor was, her voice laced with quiet concern, and Bruce, his exhaustion evident, responded softly that it wasn't too late yet, though the delay was unusual for someone so precise. Bruce explained to Carol that Valeria had ventured into the city, still determined to find a way to save the planet. He acknowledged the grim reality, noting that while they called this the last human city on Earth, it was only weeks, perhaps less, away from falling. With a heavy voice, he admits that this isn't a city anymore, it is a tomb. Carol, however, shook her head, her gaze fixed outward as she reflected on how she had always been taught to restrain her power. But when the monsters finally broke through, she vowed to let all of it go, to draw in as much energy as she could and surrender completely to it. Their grim conversation was interrupted by a report coming through. Carol glanced at Bruce and informed him that it was Valeria, but she was returning under heavy pursuit through the ruins with the enemy everywhere. Bruce wasted no time, leaping out of the room before Carol could finish, and she quickly warned Command to alert Morales that he was about to have company. Outside the city, Miles Morales swung through the ruins, racing to meet Valeria, and suddenly, a building beside him exploded. The Hulk emerged from the rubble and landed hard in the street, clearing the smoke just as Valeria came screeching around the corner in the fantastic car with Xenomorphs on her trail. Without hesitation, Miles swung down, scooped Valeria from the vehicle, and pulled her to safety as the chaos raged around them, saying how close it had been. Hulk grabbed the lower part of a building and slammed it down on the Xenomorphs, brutally crushing the aliens. Whirling around, anger etched on his face, he bellowed at Valeria for being late. Valeria, jumping down with Miles behind her, who was busy webbing up more of the creatures, nodded apologetically, explaining that things had gotten complicated. She motioned to the fantastic car, revealing a xenomorph egg stashed inside, much to the surprise of both Miles and Hulk. Later, at Weyland Tower, the egg was placed in stasis as Valeria addressed the group. She explained that this was their chance to win the war, pointing to her schematics as she outlined her plan. Every method they had used in the past, from science to magic to stop the creatures at their larval stage, had failed, and she insisted they needed to start earlier. Her solution was to create a virus that would kill the eggs. Bruce questioned whether she could succeed, but Valeria confidently assured him that she could. She just needed time. Dismissing everyone from her lab, she began her work. Shortly after, Bruce reported to Mr. Weyland, explaining Valeria's efforts. Weyland remarked on how much she was like her father, her brilliant mind carrying the hope of performing a miracle, the only thing they had left. Looking up at Bruce, Weyland's voice softened, weighted with hope and desperation. Weyland spoke with a measured tone, reflecting on the difficult choices ahead. He remarked that the day was coming when humanity would have to decide whether to stay and fight the good fight, or abandon Earth to save what was left of their species. Later, Bruce made his way down to the lab with a tray of food, but the door refused to open. He tapped the button on the security panel, but the screen says access denied. Suddenly, the screen flickered and a message from Valeria began to play. Her face appeared, tears streaming down her cheeks as she apologized. She explained how, after stealing the xenomorph egg, she had tripped on her way out and they had swarmed her. She says that a facehugger had attacked her, and when she regained consciousness, she knew something was inside her. Her voice broke as she begged Bruce not to open the door, fearing she would be responsible for the downfall of the city if it escaped. Bruce transformed into the Hulk and smashed through the lab door with a furious roar. A xenomorph leapt at him from the shadows, clawing and snapping its jaws, but Hulk caught it mid-air, crushing its throat with brute strength before ripping its head from its body. The creature's acidic blood splattered across Hulk's face, burning his skin and leaving it smoking, but his rapid healing factor quickly restored him. Reaching down, Hulk cradled Valeria's lifeless body. Miles Morales and Carol Danvers entered the room, their attention immediately drawn to the destroyed egg container. Carol warned of the danger as they scanned the lab for the loose creature. Suddenly, a facehugger darted from the shadows, latching onto Miles's face and tearing through his mask as he collapsed, struggling for breath. Carol moved to help him, but Hulk stopped her, reminding her that any attempt to remove the creature would kill Miles. At that moment, Weyland arrived, grimly emphasizing the dire stakes. An enemy was growing inside Miles, and once it emerged, it would bring destruction to them all. He declared that they had no choice but to destroy it. As Carol's glowing hands hovered in hesitation, Carol's eyes widened in surprise as Miles's costume began to shift, sliding off his body before enveloping the facehugger and taking control of it. The symbiote's voice echoed ominously, asserting that while it didn't prefer this form, it would suffice for now. Miles suddenly gasped as he sat upright, his body now clad in a sleek white suit formed by the symbiote. He took a moment to recover while Carol helped him to his feet. Miles nodded in affirmation as the venom-altered facehugger grafted itself to his chest. The symbiote hissed its satisfaction, but Miles shook his head in frustration, determined to move forward, knowing they had to escape the planet before it was too late.